"Sorry, Mom, there's no space for you anymore." That's what she said. Not yelling, not crying, just saying it like she was paying off a parking ticket. She didn't look mad. She looked efficient, like she was checking off some final thing on a list. Tyler was behind her, standing near the door with one hand still on the suitcase handle. He didn't look at me, just let go and let it drop onto the porch with a soft little thud, right beside the trash bin. So neat, so tidy, like they'd practiced. I just stood there, holding my breath. My casserole was still in the oven. My tea was still warm on the counter. And somehow, I had turned into clutter. I'm Evelyn Barrett. I raised that girl. I sat by her side through every fever. I packed her lunch every morning all the way through 12th grade. I paid off her college loans without ever asking for anything in return, not even a thank you. I beat cancer, twice. And when her father, my Richard, was dying, I held his hand so she wouldn't have to. So no, I wasn't waiting for some grand thank you, but I wasn't ready for this either. That Saturday morning sky was too blue, too bright for the way my stomach had sunk. Birds were still chirping like nothing had happened, like betrayal wasn't bouncing off every brick in that house. The porch light above me turned off, just like that, quiet, unbothered. Jenna smoothed the edge of her cardigan. Her voice was tight, but not cruel. "You've just been tense lately, Mom. And with Tyler working from home and the kids needing quiet, this just isn't sustainable. You understand." No, I didn't, but I nodded. I looked down at the suitcase. My suitcase. Someone else had packed it. The zipper was straining because they didn't know how to fold Richard's old sweater. The top handle was worn and fraying. Richard used to joke that I needed to replace it. "You hold on to things too long, Eve," he'd say. Maybe he was right. They didn't offer me a ride. They didn't offer me a plan. Tyler cleared his throat. It sounded almost like an apology. Jenna gave me this half smile, the kind that doesn't touch your eyes, then closed the door. Not in my face, behind me. And somehow, that felt worse. I picked up the suitcase and started walking. I didn't know where, just knew it couldn't be here. The wheels bumped against the pavement at the end of the driveway. That's when I saw it, the lavender bush. It was half dead, leaning sideways in a cracked pot by the porch. Jenna never watered it. Richard loved lavender. He used to say it made the house feel calmer, like we were in Provence when spring first rolled in. I didn't cry, not then. At the corner, I stopped, looked back. The house looked the same, but I didn't. Maybe they thought I'd break down. Maybe they expected me to beg or scream or freeze, but I didn't. I just walked. And I remembered what Richard used to say. When you stop being welcome, you start building new doors. That night, I didn't sleep on a park bench. I didn't call a shelter. I went back to the one place they forgot still had my name on it, an old studio above the bookstore. Dusty little room, kettles still sitting on the shelf, the kind of place no one wanted, except me. If you've ever stood in front of a door that used to open just for you and found it locked instead, maybe you know what that moment felt like. So tell me, have you ever had to start over somewhere you didn't choose, just to remember who you were before the world forgot? Leave me a note in the comments. I read every single one. And sometimes, knowing someone out there understands, that's enough to keep going. And if you're wondering what I found behind that forgotten studio door, you might want to stick around. This story's just getting started. They thought they'd erased me. I could almost hear Jenna's voice again, smug and rushed, saying that old upstairs space would make a great yoga room. It was funny, the way she said it, months ago, with that tone people use when they've already decided you're not really a person anymore, just furniture. But they missed something. They forgot the studio still had my name on the lease. It was already dark when I got there. My steps were uneven from the long walk, but my body remembered the way. I crouched down beside the old, chipped mailbox panel and pulled back the strip of duct tape. The key was still there, exactly where Richard and I had hidden it 10 years ago. I let out a quiet little laugh, tired but real. Some things, thankfully, were just too small for Jenna to turn into profit. The door creaked like it hadn't been opened in forever, and maybe it hadn't. The smell hit me right away. Books, dry wood, and this faint little trace of lavender. The curtains were still drawn. All the furniture was covered with white cloths, like ghosts waiting for someone to wake them up. A teacup sat next to the electric kettle, long dry but untouched. My sanctuary hadn't been gutted. It hadn't been staged or scrubbed or cleared out. It had just been forgotten. I flipped the light switch without thinking, knowing full well the power was out. Still, doing it felt right, like I was saying to the room, I'm home. My phone buzzed in my coat. It was Diane. She didn't even say hello, just asked if I was okay. I told her I wasn't bleeding, wasn't in jail, so I was calling it a win. She said I could stay with her. I sank down onto that old chaise lounge in the studio and leaned back. I told her I needed a minute, just a place that didn't come with pity or some kind of performance. She was quiet for a second, then said all right, but told me not to disappear again. I promised I wouldn't, though both of us knew I probably would. Disappearing has always been how I cope. After we hung up, I walked over to the built-in drawers along the wall. I opened one and found a small sachet of dried lavender. It had faded with time, but the scent was still there, soft, steady, like memory. Then I saw it, a folder. It was tucked under some old receipts and a box of loose buttons. Thick blue folder, labeled in Richard's handwriting. It said, Trusts and Real Estate, Richard Barrett. I just stared at it for a second. My hand paused. Richard was the kind of man who took paperwork seriously. He never trusted digital files unless he had to. I opened the folder slowly, half expecting a puff of dust. Inside were copies. No, originals. The house deed, notes about ownership. And then something else. A section left blank. No signature, no witness, no transfer. That house, it wasn't legally Jenna's. I sat back down with the folder in my lap. My pulse had slowed, but it felt steady. For the first time in hours, I didn't feel like someone's forgotten coat tossed over a bench. I felt planted. Not blooming, not yet, but rooted. Outside, the wind nudged the window. I held the lavender sachet close and closed my eyes. The studio was cold. The power was still out, but I had paper. And in this country, paper is everything. Jenna didn't call, Tyler didn't text, and I didn't break. The studio didn't have any clocks. I kept track of time by how many mugs of coffee I drank and how often the rain tapped at the windows, like it had something to say. There's something bold about silence when you choose not to fill it. It stretches out and dares you to fall apart, but I didn't. On the second day, I looked at my suitcase, still zipped, still damp from that night near the trash bins. I wouldn't unpack. Doing that felt like admitting this was permanent. Instead, I made toast on a little camping stove Diane had dropped off, drank black coffee out of the chipped mug Richard used to call indestructible, scribbled a few lines in my notebook, then tore them out. I had tried writing Jenna a letter. Just words. No blame, no begging. I only made it through 3 lines before I knew it wouldn't matter. She wouldn't read it. And if she did, she'd just underline whatever fit her version of the story and ignore the rest. I crumpled the page, tossed it in the bin, and didn't try again. Diane came by that afternoon. Her umbrella was dripping, and her arms were full of groceries, and this stubborn kind of cheer. She said she brought real bread, not that cardboard wheat I always pretended to like, and coffee, the good kind, none of that instant stuff. She moved through the room with purpose, never mentioning the fact I hadn't changed my clothes in 2 days, or that the heater still didn't work. While stacking oranges on the windowsill, she said her brother had a lawyer who handled estate weirdness. Said he got his ex-wife out of a beach house she tried to claim. I gave her a look. She smiled and said, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some file paperwork." She left before the sun did. Promised she'd call, not text. That meant something. Later that evening, I walked to the city records office. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and heavy. The clerk at the desk didn't ask any questions. I asked for copies of the property title for Richard's house, the one that used to be ours, the one that, for a while, I still thought of as mine. The printouts were plain, thin, black and white, but on page 3, buried in the middle, I saw it. Or maybe what I didn't see. Richard's signature was there. Jenna's wasn't. No notary, no witness, no official transfer. The house wasn't legally hers, not yet. I walked back slowly. My coat stuck to my back. Every block felt like both a loss and a small victory. When I got to the studio, I set the papers down, dried my hands, and picked up my phone. Frances. Her name lit up on the screen. I stared at it for a moment. My thumb hovered. Then I hit call. It rang and kept ringing. Voicemail. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. Back at the window, night had settled in, and the rain had returned. I pulled the suitcase a little closer. Slowly, I unzipped it. Not all the way, just enough to reach in and take out Richard's old sweater. Navy blue. The elbows were faded. It smelled like cedar and memory. I folded it and placed it under my head on the sofa, not to cry, just to rest. Tomorrow, I'd call again, and this time, I'd speak. I didn't need revenge. I needed someone who understood paper and silence. The law office was tucked quietly on the edge of downtown Portland. 3 stories, brick the color of dried roses. No sign out front, just a frosted glass door with the name Francis Collins, Esquire, etched in clean serif letters. Diane waited in the car. She asked if I wanted her to come in. I told her no. This was something I had to do on my own. Inside, the air was cool and dry, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without even thinking. There was a gray couch in the corner, untouched, no magazines, no flowers. Frances didn't decorate for comfort. She curated for clarity. She looked exactly the same. Silver hair, parted neatly, black glasses, tailored blazer. No perfume, no small talk. She asked if I brought the folder. I slid it across the desk. She opened it carefully, like she was handling something alive. She read out loud as she went. Trusts, property ledger, copy of the deed. Then she paused. No notarized transfer. No buyer's signature. No county stamp. She looked up and said Jenna never filed it. Something loosened in me, but I stayed still. Frances said the house was still mine, on paper. She leaned back, tapped the folder once, then closed it. She told me she could send a quiet notice. No drama, no public record, at least not yet. If I let her handle it clean, Jenna wouldn't even have time to hire a lawyer before she'd have to respond. I let out a slow breath. It wasn't relief. It was something more like readiness. I asked what she needed from me. Frances reached into a drawer and pulled out a 2-page agreement. She slid it toward me. A signature and a decision. I read it, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to be sure. Retainer, strategy, boundaries, confidentiality, all the careful words that built a wall between raw emotion and a system that didn't care who cried harder. Before I signed, I looked up. I told her I didn't want a scene. I just wanted my name back. Frances nodded. If I played it right, she said, I wouldn't need to raise my voice at all. The pen felt heavier than I expected. When I was done, she took the papers without ceremony and clipped them into a folder labeled Barrett Estate. She looked at me and said, I may have been thrown out of that house, but on paper, it still had my name, and in court, that speaks louder than blood. I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt. Outside, the sky was starting to dim. Diane was still in the car, fingers tapping on the steering wheel like she was fighting the urge to light a cigarette. I got in without saying a word. She glanced over at me and said I wasn't crying. I told her no, I wasn't. That night, I sat on the studio sofa with Richard's sweater wrapped around my shoulders like armor. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I dreamed about keys and locks that still turned for me. Strategy has a scent. Mine smelled like lavender, and it bloomed on windowsills they never thought I'd see again. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was planting one. It started with a little clay pot I carried home from the nursery just 2 blocks from the studio. Lavender, tough, forgiving, quietly beautiful. I didn't pick it for how it looked. I picked it for what it meant. Richard used to say lavender never panicked. Not in the frost, not in the heat. It just held on, waited, and bloomed when the time was right. I named her Mercy, set her on the windowsill where she could reach the light. The studio started to smell better within hours. Then came the paper. Frances had drawn up 2 certified letters. One was a formal notice of injunction on the house, the other, a quiet but clear request for a probate hearing. Both wrapped in legal language that didn't shout, it whispered with authority. I didn't need a fight, I needed precision. The postal clerk raised an eyebrow when I slid the envelopes across the counter. He asked if I wanted certified return receipt. I said yes, signatures required. He nodded, stamped the corner with that heavy little thunk, then peeled off the tracking slips. He asked if it was important business, like it was small talk. I told him it was just a family matter. Then I slipped the receipts into my wallet and walked out without looking back. On the way home, I passed the library. I stepped inside and pulled up the old property records, not because I needed to, but because I could. Sometimes power shows up in repetition, in proving to yourself that you haven't forgotten what they hoped you had. The house still had Richard's name on it, and mine too, even if the ink had faded. That was enough, for now. Back at the studio, I made some tea and sat beside Mercy, watching the afternoon light stretch across the floor. The scent of soil, old paper, and lavender drifted together into something that almost felt like a future. Just out of curiosity, I pulled up Jenna's social media. It was public, of course, always curated, always spotless. There she was, posing on the porch I used to sweep every Friday morning. The caption said, "Spring cleaning the house we built. Fresh starts." Not a single word about me, nothing about her father, nothing about the hands that painted those shutters or sealed those windows or planted that first lavender bush she let die last fall. I didn't comment. I closed the app. Instead, I trimmed the brittle tips off Mercy's stems and whispered to her, "That house wasn't built by you. I've got the blueprints and the bruises to prove it." This wasn't about bitterness. It was about truth. Every day, I watered the lavender and checked the mailbox. No reply. A week went by, then 10 days. On the 11th morning, a thick white envelope landed in my box, stamped in red, undelivered, refused to sign. I brought it to Frances while we were having tea in her office. She smirked, not out of cruelty, out of recognition. She said that was even better. Refusing to accept notice is still notice. The court sees it as acknowledgement. She blinked first. I held that envelope in both hands. It didn't feel like rejection. It felt like documentation. That night, I opened the studio window. The breeze came in soft. Mercy leaned into it, completely calm. I didn't sleep with hope. I slept with certainty. And if you've ever felt like the world moved on without you, like the people you gave everything to suddenly saw you as disposable, then maybe you understand a little of what I'm carrying. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to start over? Not out of anger, but out of quiet strength? Tell me in the comments. Your stories matter too. And if this feels like a journey worth walking together, go ahead and subscribe. Because trust me, what happens next, they'll never see it coming. You know what they didn't expect? That I'd read every line, every form, every single word they hoped I'd skip. Frances met me at the door of her office. No coffee, no small talk, just a folder already opened on her desk. I sat down slowly. My knees were still stiff from too many nights on the studio couch. She didn't smile. She told me it wasn't just unfinished paperwork anymore. She slid a photocopy across the desk and said it was forged. She turned the page toward me, and there it was, my name, Evelyn Ruth Barrett, written in a slanted, looping scrawl I hadn't used since college. It looked like someone trying to fake grace with a heavy hand. I stared at it without blinking. I asked if she was sure, even though I already knew. Frances nodded. She told me my real signature was on file from the bank, from the trust, from the medical directives Richard had filed. Then she tapped the paper and said this one wasn't mine. I closed my eyes, and I heard Richard's voice, the way he used to say it when we sat together sorting through bills on a quiet Sunday morning. Paper leaves footprints, Ev, even if you wipe your shoes. Jenna had signed it. I knew it deep down. She always had a fast hand and faster confidence. But as Frances flipped through the records and pointed to another form, this one, notarized, I saw something else. Tyler's name. He had signed as a witness. And that made the room feel colder. I didn't say anything, not right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the flash drive I'd been carrying for years. It had scanned copies of every legal document Richard and I had ever signed together. Frances plugged it in, scrolled through quickly. I pointed to the screen and said, "There, that's the real signature." She paused, zoomed in, nodded. She said that changed the tone. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was fraud, and she'd draft a motion to revoke the deed on grounds of forgery, quietly, but with teeth. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't afraid. I said they thought I'd be too old, too tired, too kind to notice. Frances looked up. Her eyes were sharp behind her glasses. I told her I'd buried better people and outlived worse lies. That night, I sat by the window in the studio. Mercy, the lavender plant, had 2 new buds. I didn't light a candle. I didn't pour wine or cry or pray. I just opened my notebook and wrote my name, over and over again. Evelyn Ruth Barrett. Not to practice, but to reclaim. Somewhere along the way, this past week had shifted. Grief had turned into precision. The silence didn't echo anymore. It focused. Because a name isn't just ink, it's legacy, and they tried to steal mine. Frances had warned me the next part would be slow. Motions would be filed, clerks scheduled, papers served. But it was movement, and that alone was more than they expected from someone they had dismissed like an old coat in a donation bin. They forgot something. Older women carry more than pain. We carry records, we carry receipts, and we carry patience. Jenna faked my name. What she didn't know was, I had just taken it back. The papers were moving. The law was in motion. But me, I was done holding on to things that no longer held me back. Frances had expected me to want something dramatic, a court date, a big confrontation in front of a judge. But by the time we sat down to review the filing, I had already made another decision, one even she didn't see coming. I told her I wanted to list the house. She looked up and asked if I meant to sell it. I said yes, quietly, legally, completely. Frances blinked, then gave a small smile. Not because she agreed, but because she understood. She said Richard would have liked that move. I nodded. He used to say, when you stop being welcomed, start building new doors. And this wasn't about crawling back through a window someone else had slammed shut. This was about deciding which keys I still wanted to carry. Later that day, I sat on the edge of my bed at the studio. My laptop was open. My hair was still damp from the morning rain. I had a meeting with the real estate agent. Her name was Elise. She was polite, neutral, just warm enough to feel human. She had gone through everything: the title, the pending injunction, the estate trust. It all held up. The house was still in my name. Jenna hadn't thought to check the small print. Elise said there was already interest. 2 cash buyers, both local. One was a young couple expecting their first baby. I didn't flinch. I just told her to move forward. Jenna wouldn't know about the listing until the notice was officially filed with the county. By then, the sign would already be in the yard. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. That evening, I took a walk by the river. The air smelled like sun-warmed stone and cut grass. Ducks drifted near the banks, quiet and half curious. On a bench nearby, a young couple sat close, the man holding a baby wrapped in a soft pastel sling. For a moment, I let myself remember. The day Richard and I first found that house. The way he had tested every doorknob. The way I had imagined grandchildren running barefoot across the yard. Not to show off, just to belong. But memories aren't mortgages, and I had stopped paying interest on the past. When Frances called to confirm the listing was live, I didn't pause. I told her to let them find out what it feels like when someone else decides where you sleep. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You're ready." And I said yes, but not to go backward. The for sale sign went up that Friday, just after 2 in the afternoon. Elise sent me a photo. The lawn looked freshly trimmed. The lavender bush near the porch was still clinging to what was left. At 2:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. Jenna Barrett. Incoming call. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The house wasn't my battlefield anymore. I needed to build something no one could take from me, not this time. After the listing went live, I stopped checking the county records. I stopped refreshing my inbox, waiting for notices or offers. Frances was handling all of that now. I realized my time was better spent creating something, not chasing what had already fallen apart. What if your second act wasn't about revenge, but about legacy? The Richard Barrett Dignity Trust didn't come from strategy. It came from memory, from those quiet Saturday mornings Richard and I used to share, sitting in the living room, reading paperbacks while the radio played low in the background. He once told me, dignity is what people try to take when they can't steal anything else. So I named the trust after him. It started small, just enough for groceries, a month of rent, or maybe a clean set of sheets and a door that locked from the inside. It was meant for women like me, women over 60 who'd been pushed out, cut off, or quietly erased. Diane cried when I told her. She asked if it would be in my name. I told her no, it's in his, but I'm the one unlocking it. She came with me to the community nonprofit fair by the old public library. We set up a folding table and hung a simple banner. Nothing fancy, just some lavender-colored flyers and a clipboard for names. It rained that morning, but by noon, the clouds had cleared. A woman named Margie came by. She took 2 flyers, one for her and one for her sister. She said nobody thinks we need help, but we still bleed when we're cut. I nodded and told her that's why we keep bandages in our own names now. The following week, I submitted an op-ed to the Portland Tribune. The title was, "I was left beside a trash bin. I didn't stay there." I didn't mention Jenna or Tyler by name. I didn't have to. The truth has its own sound. It echoes even without specifics. Diane read it out loud at a little cafe downtown, right after open mic poetry night. People clapped, soft and slow. One man, maybe 65, maybe 70, placed his hand over his heart. That night, I got an email from a woman in Utah. Her name was Bonnie. She wrote that she wasn't brave, but I made her feel less invisible. She hadn't spoken to her daughter in 3 years. She didn't know anyone else was walking this road. She thanked me for lighting the way. I didn't write back right away. I just read it, twice. Then I printed it and pinned it above the kettle in my studio. Sometimes at night, I'd touch the paper before bed, like a prayer I didn't need to say out loud. They took the house, but I built a door, and I leave it unlocked so others can walk through. I didn't think anyone else from my past would reach out, but that Friday, Tyler did. He sent an email. Short, formal, not to apologize, but to offer a deal. I didn't respond. Not yet. If any part of my story reminds you of something you've been through, of being overlooked or underestimated or quietly pushed aside, I hope you'll share it in the comments. Sometimes, just knowing we're not alone changes everything. Have you ever let go of something, not because you lost, but because you chose peace? I'd really love to hear about it. And if you're wondering what I did with Tyler's offer, you might want to stay close. Let's just say not every deal is made in dollars. When you stop reacting, they start wondering. That silence? That's strategy. I didn't reply to Tyler's email. I didn't call Jenna. I didn't bother correcting the rumors Diane said were floating around their church group or their neighborhood. I let the silence stretch. Sharp. Intentional. People fear two things more than anything else: being ignored and being outplayed. I gave them both. September came with that kind of soft golden light that makes even old bricks look gentle. I wore a navy cardigan Richard once said looked good on me, paired it with flats that didn't hurt my feet, and I walked into the courthouse like I was delivering mail, not memories. I didn't say a word, just took a seat in the back row, 2 benches behind a woman arguing about a parking ticket. The judge had already reviewed our filings. Francis didn't need me there, but I needed to be there. Jenna came in 10 minutes late. Tyler followed behind her. He had his phone in one hand, hair combed like he was trying to prove something. I didn't look at them. Didn't flinch when Jenna whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, asking if I was really there. Didn't nod when Tyler scanned the room. Then the clerk called our case number. Frances stood up. Her voice was steady. She reaffirmed everything we had already submitted in writing: forged signature, incomplete title transfer, and our legal right to list and sell the house under estate law. Jenna stood halfway up like she might say something, then sat back down. Tyler didn't even make eye contact with the judge. I left before the hearing ended. There was nothing else I needed to see. Outside, the sky looked like brushed steel. No birds, just the still hush of a city quietly going about its business. I took the long way back to the studio, past the cafe where Diane had read my op-ed, waved at a street musician playing an off-key guitar solo without apology. When I walked through the door, the kettle was already hissing on the stove. I don't know if it was habit or mercy. I poured a cup of tea and opened my laptop. 5 new emails. One was from Bonnie in Utah. She said she had given the flyer to her neighbor, and that neighbor cried. Said maybe she wasn't broken, just bruised. Another came from a woman in Missouri. She wrote that she had left with nothing but her purse and a library card, and that because of my article, she found the courage to ask for help. I read each message slowly, letting their words settle into place. Later that night, I wrote just one line in my journal. They wanted me to chase. I chose to walk. And now they can run in circles trying to find me. The court's judgment came 3 weeks later. I didn't rush to open the envelope when it arrived. The house had sold, not just legally, fully. The funds were transferred, the trust was updated, and I still hadn't spoken to Jenna. Not one word. I thought I'd already heard every kind of silence from her, but this one came with nervous hands and a knock on my door. It was late October, one of those gray Portland days where the light never quite arrives. I had just put the kettle on, a habit I hadn't dropped even when no one came for tea. Steam curled into the corners of the kitchen, softening everything it touched. Then came the knock. I didn't rush, I didn't guess. I opened the door the way you might flip a page, half expecting it to be blank. But it wasn't. Jenna was standing there. Her hair was damp and pulled back. She was wearing a coat that looked too thin for the cold. She looked smaller, not physically, just smaller in presence, like her confidence had shrunk now that it wasn't being fed by entitlement. Behind me, the kettle started to hiss. She said hi. Her voice was quiet. I didn't say anything. I just opened the door a little wider. She stepped inside like someone trying not to leave footprints. Her eyes moved around the room. She saw the books stacked near the window, the lavender blooming stubbornly on the sill, the old chair Richard used to say was good for stubborn backs. I motioned for her to sit. She did, slowly. Diane had just dropped off my mail a few minutes earlier, but had left before seeing Jenna. I was grateful for that. I didn't need that bridge catching fire just yet. The silence between us was thick, but not suffocating, more like something that waits. I poured the tea. Jenna looked down at her hands. Then she said she didn't know what else to do. I took my time stirring honey into my mug. I told her, "You didn't have to know what to do. You just had to know what not to do, and you did it anyway." Her face shifted, not with tears, but with something sharper, that kind of recognition that only shows up when it's too late to fix anything. She didn't argue. Maybe for the first time in our entire relationship, she didn't try to adjust how I saw her. She just sat there and let it burn a little. Outside, the rain started again. Light at first, tapping against the window, like someone else asking to be let in. She said she knew she couldn't undo any of it. She wasn't even sure what she was asking for. I didn't answer. I just poured the tea. It was the same blend Richard used to bring home from that little specialty shop, bergamot and dried apple. I hadn't used it since the very beginning of all this, but somehow it felt right, not as forgiveness, just as clarity. She wrapped her fingers around the cup. Her nails were uneven, one of those small details you notice when someone stops performing. Then she asked if I would ever forgive her. I didn't answer. I poured the tea. We didn't argue. We didn't hug. We just sat there, two women with a decade of silence between us and one cup of tea in front of us. The steam rose gently between us, like a polite boundary. I didn't reach across it, neither did she. Sometimes the apology never comes, and sometimes it doesn't have to. The sun had started to dip behind the buildings outside. The light in the studio shifted from pale gray to a soft amber. It caught the edge of Jenna's mug as she stared at it without drinking. Her eyes moved around the room, but didn't land anywhere. Then they stopped at the plant on the windowsill. She asked if it was lavender. I nodded and told her yes. She said it was thriving. I turned toward it and smiled, not at her, not even at the plant, just at what it represented. I told her I had named it Mercy. Her brow furrowed a little. She said she didn't know plants could have names. I told her only the ones you talk to. Then I set my cup down gently. We didn't say anything after that. We just listened, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the quiet breathing of a room that had learned how to carry memory without hurting. Her eyes found the photo of Richard on the shelf, the one from our 30th anniversary. He was laughing in it, caught mid-chuckle, his tie a little crooked. She noticed it and said I had kept that photo. I told her I keep what matters. Her mouth opened like she was about to ask something, but then she didn't. No defense, no confession, just that kind of pause you feel in your chest when you realize you've missed your last chance to say something while it still mattered. Then she said he liked lavender. That surprised us both. I said yes, but only in the garden. He used to say it made the kitchen smell like soap. She gave a short, quiet laugh, told me that sounded like him. I stood up, walked to the windowsill, took the little scissors from the drawer, and clipped one sprig from the plant. Not the biggest, not the smallest, one that had grown bent but strong, with its blooms still purple at the tips. I wrapped it in a clean napkin and handed it to her. She didn't ask why, didn't say thank you, just took it like it was something fragile, Her thumb brushed the napkin once, then she held it tighter. I sat back down. I told her I wasn't going to say what she should do with it, just that it grows better when it's not alone. She blinked quickly, almost said something, but didn't. And that was okay. Not every silence is empty. Eventually she stood. She tucked the lavender into her coat pocket, looked around the room once more, then looked back at me. She told me to take care. I nodded, nothing more. She left with lavender in her hand and silence in her throat. I watched her go. This time, not with hope, not with bitterness, just with clarity. The suitcase was still there, not by the trash bins, not slumped at the foot of someone else's stairs. It stood upright in the corner of my studio, right where I had left it. And I didn't avoid it anymore, not like a wound. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with reclamation. Outside, winter had left its first light frost on the windows. The lavender plant on the sill had grown full and confident, even as the daylight grew shorter. Mercy had made it through another season. So had I. I lit a small candle, not for ceremony, just for calm. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the suitcase toward me. The zipper gave way with a soft tug. No groan, no struggle, just the quiet sound of something long overdue. Inside were the same folded blouses, the same wool socks I had packed back in June, Richard's sweater still faintly holding his scent, and a photo tucked into the side pocket, me holding baby Tyler, both of us squinting in the California sun. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just began to unpack. The shirts went into the second drawer, the socks into a small woven basket. The photo? I placed it behind the other frames. Not gone, just quieter now. And the sweater? I folded it with both hands, smoothed the sleeves, the way I always did after laundry day. Then I laid it in the bottom drawer. Not because I was grieving, because I was grateful. The suitcase, now empty, felt lighter than I remembered. I stood up and carried it to the small hall closet, set it upright, pushed it gently to the back. I didn't close the door right away. I just stood there for a moment, holding the knob, breathing. Then the phone chimed, an email. It was from Bonnie. She wrote that my story had inspired her to go down to the senior shelter in Ogden. She had signed up to volunteer once a week. She thanked me for giving her the courage to show up. I smiled, sat down at my desk, let my fingers hover over the keyboard for a second, then typed back. I told her, I think I'll speak at that event after all, because sometimes just showing up is half the healing. A breeze came through the slightly cracked window, stirring the lavender leaves. I didn't rush to close it. I liked the cold. It reminded me I was alive, awake. Behind me, the closet door creaked. I turned, walked back, and with one final breath, I shut it. Cleanly, completely. No dramatics, no fanfare, just me, standing in a space that finally felt like mine. I didn't get my daughter back, but I got myself, and in the end, that was always enough. I didn't get my daughter back, but I finally got to unpack my suitcase, and with it, the quiet weight of everything I used to carry alone. Sometimes, life doesn't give us apologies. It gives us choices. And the power isn't in what others give or take from us. It's in what we choose to keep, or what we finally let go. If we can find peace without permission, that's a kind of freedom no one can take. If any part of my story reminded you of your own, whether it's loss, resilience, or just the quiet act of starting over, I hope you'll share it in the comments. You never know who needs your words today. And if you're ready for another story, one about family, boundaries, and the kind of betrayal that shows up with dessert, stay with me. Because next up is a story called My Son Set Me Up at Dinner After I Refused to Fund His Luxury Wedding and Called Me Selfish. It begins with a toast and ends with a table turned.